for Indie Author Magazine, and I'm here with Jay Stilipec, and we're going to be talking about backstories. Tell me about the problem that you found to which this was the answer.
I love making characters. I got into role-playing back in the 80s, originally with Star Wars and Marvel superheroes, and then into D&D, and then into GURPS and Mutants and Masterminds and all types of role-playing games. But more than anything, I just loved making new characters, and I loved making them very diverse. So I was always pulling charts from this book or that book, and I found specialized one by a company called Task Force Games, and a special selection they had called Central Casting, Heroes of Legend, and then Heroes of Tomorrow. And these were genre-based charts that you rolled through, and it'd be like, oh, roll on this chart. And number 26, go to page 10. And you roll on another chart and go to page 22. And you're always back and forth and back and forth.
Right.
But it was so detailed. You got when you were born, what happened when you were born, what did your parents do, how did they meet, events that happened while you were a child, events that happened while you were in the military. Very detailed, but cumbersome with all the back and forth. And I used that a lot, not as much as I would like, because again, it was so cumbersome. And I'm just making characters. I'm just using D&D to make characters. And I started going to conventions and cosplaying, and I saw people selling things at a booth, and I'm like, oh, I would like to have a product. I'd like to have something I could sell to people other than just being a cosplayer. And I was like, what can I do? What am I good at? I'm a retired Navy journalist, so I'm a good writer. I can edit, I can brainstorm, I'm creative. I was like, oh, I could bring the books and help people make their characters, but nobody's gonna wanna sit down for a half an hour and make a character, and who carries their character sheet around with them? So I said, maybe if I compressed it down into a couple of index cards with just the basic questions, like a tarot card reading. And boom, that's where the idea came from. So I started pulling elements from the books, pulling elements from other things in my own imagination, and boiled it down to originally the basic deck, which was 60 cards. Actually, it was originally 64, and I later modified it and changed it with the different categories of life and mystery and change, just different things that can happen in a person's life. Originally, they were chronological. It was like birth events and childhood events and family events. And I just realized that was too limiting, so I restructured it into just like more broad-based categories. And like a tarot card, you literally flip over a few cards, and you've got a character who has some type of a blessing, they're very worldly, and they have something to do with their friends that has affected their life. And you can stop right there. I know people who just use the bold type, they just use the title, and they let that spark their imagination. But you've got some cards that have some flavor text, they'll give you some suggestions. You've got cards that have a chart that has up to 10 more suggestions. And if you don't have a 10-sided die handy, the backs of the cards have numbers on them, 1 to 10. So you can use that as an example. And your best friend became your lover. And it's a touch, a spark to ignite the fire of this character's backstory and to make their life a little bit more realistic and believable.
So when did the author community factor into what you were doing?
So I did a Kickstarter about 2 years ago at the end of 2019, ran it for 45 days. I was looking for $3,000. I got $25,000, and people all over the world were interested. And as I was advertising, I was telling friends about it. And a friend of mine where I worked, she said, oh, my mother is an author. She might get a kick out of this because originally it was really based on RPGs.
Mm-hmm.
She said she might like this for just coming up with ideas for her or characters for her books and her novels. So I pitched the idea to her. She thought it was great. She pitched the idea to a couple of friends. And so I started reaching out to more writing communities and more writing groups. And I started to say, you know what, this can be used for songwriting. This can be used for poetry. This can be used by teachers. This can be used by actors, or because you go to an improvisation show and they could literally flip a card, say, okay, you owe somebody a favor, go. And it just really opened it up to something beyond role-playing games. And the biggest push that I got was I went to Alaska Comic-Con in February of 2020, which was my 45th birthday. And I had been in contact with an author in my hometown of Fairbanks, and he said, I want to buy 30 copies of these decks, and he was going to give them away as favors at a convention in
Was
Vegas.
that Craig Martell?
Yes, thank you, Craig.
Yeah.
So he said, I want to buy 30, 40, 50 of these, and I'm going to give them away as favors at this convention. And I said,
I got these.
that's where you got it. We just met online originally because he's in Alaska and I'm from Alaska. He was at the convention. No, wait, that's when I first met him. I was at the convention. I saw he was a writer. I said, oh, you're a writer. Cool. Hey, I had him in my pocket. I said, you might be interested in these. He said, I love them. And they weren't even printed yet. The Kickstarter was over, but we were still in China doing the printing. And he said, I want 50 of them when they're ready to go. And I said, that's awesome. So then when the whole thing came out, but then COVID delayed things. And then he said, just give me 30. And then he started giving them away as sweepstakes little gifts on his website where he was helping other writers. And again, that connected me with more other writers, and that's how it exploded from there.
And how many authors do you have now as customers, as in percentage?
I don't know exactly. I mean, I always like asking people, whenever people buy a deck from me, I always respond, thank you very much for purchasing. How did you hear about us? And usually they say, oh, I heard about you on this podcast, or I heard about you on this YouTube channel, because I've been advertised in a couple of places. And I'm on Twitter, and I'm on Instagram, and I'm on Facebook. But I would say maybe 5%, 5 to 10% of the people are non-gamer folks. They're either into the poetry or creative writing, anything like that. And I think it's great to pull from that. I have had literal teachers say that they use these in their high school classrooms to help students with the creative writing aspect of narrative stories in high school. And now I'm in training myself to become a high school English teacher in Baltimore City, and I'm pretty sure I'll use them.
That's fantastic, because you work for the defense.
I used to. I was in the Navy. I retired about 6 years ago. And then I was working as a journalist instructor for the military. And I left that position about 8 months ago. And since then, I was pursuing some other interests that kind of fell through. So it was like I left the other job a little too early. It was like, oops. But then I found this opportunity with Baltimore City training residency, or teaching residency in Baltimore City. And they've been putting us through training to make sure we know how to teach students and make sure you're using positive language, and that you know how to correct a student when they talk out of turn, and you know how to, interrupt a student so that you can make a correction, but then get right back into it. And it's been very helpful in writing our lesson plans and things like that. So I'm really excited to start applying to schools, and hopefully starting this winter.
Awesome. That's great. What's your favorite genre?
Sci-fi, for sure. And subset time travel, hands down. I will watch anytime. Some of them suck. Even the most famous, quote unquote, time travel series, Back to the Future, the second one annoys me so much because it breaks its own time travel rules. In the first movie, Doc establishes that he puts Einstein in the car and sends him 1 minute into the future. And he says that Einstein skipped over that whole minute. That's what, they even showed with. Then at the very end of the movie, he takes Marty and Jennifer in the car, spoilers, and travels 30 years into the future to show them their children. But they just skipped over 30 years of time. They should have arrived in a future where Marty and Jennifer vanished mysteriously in a flying DeLorean, and Biff was the last one to see them alive. So they shouldn't have been able to see themselves, let alone their children, because they weren't there. And even if, oh, this is them after they returned back to the present, that's not the rule we set down, number one. And number two, why weren't they expecting themselves to show up?
Plot holes.
Major plot hole. But that's the story they wanted to tell. I get it. That's the story they wanted to tell. But it still broke the rules that they established in the first movie. And time travel movies have difficult. Star Trek, for example, is a space show, but they use time travel a lot. And because they don't care, time travel be one way in one movie and another way in another. And some people say time travel is like that. Time travel fluctuates. It's random. You never know how it's going to affect the flow of the continuum. I get that, but establish that. Make that a policy. Don't say that, oh, time is a straight line, and then go and mess it up. Like they did with the Marvel series now. They had established a single timeline, and now they've established No, we now have multiple timelines, and this is why.
You seem to be a fan of the most irksome genre there is.
It is frustrating. I think it's because it can be interpreted so many different ways since we've never done it. Until somebody physically travels through time and says, this is the way the rules are in reality, we can make up whatever we want. But it just, because you can do so many different things. Imagine the difference between a story where you can't interact with yourself in the past for reasons, and one where you can interact with yourself. You can literally go back in time, give yourself a note and say, don't screw up this time, jackass. You can just do so much with those two completely different stories just by changing that one aspect. There was a great series who wrote it. It was called the Manifold series. I want to say it was either Stephen Brust or Stephen Baxter. But the first book is about this former astronaut who his wife passed away and he's kind of dealing with these things. And out on the edge of space, like right past Pluto, there's this ring. And when people go through it, it teleports you to the next ring, like a Stargate, to the next star system, but it still travels at the speed of light. You're not aging, but your particles still take time to get there. And what they realize is that there's life everywhere. There's life on every planet in our solar system. There have been these mass extinctions on Earth several times. There was life on the moon. And what it is, the galaxy irradiates the whole galaxy every couple of thousand years just to keep life from going out of control. And you're like, oh, that's an interesting story. Then you shift over to the second book. It's the same time period, but this time his wife's alive and he's got cancer. So in this one, we're it. There's like a ring shows up on a comet that then falls into orbit around Earth, and they go and they look into it and they send a probe through it. And basically this is the cold death theory of quantum mechanics or of astronomy, that all the stars are just going to burn out and we're just going to be in that future. Human beings are the only life in the universe. We're it. So people who live in that ridiculously distant future that are just basically clinging to the energy, the leech energy from black holes, they have reached back into the present and created a group of super intelligent children who will literally cause entropy to happen immediately and freeze all of us, basically causing genocide. Because basically they said, you know what, humans, it's not worth it. And they just killed us all. So it's not only an alternate timeline, but the rules of the fabric of this universe are completely different. And the ring is represented differently in this separate universe. So it's 3-4 different books that all have the ring as a component, but the rules of time and space and life are different in each one, even though some of the characters are similar. So it's not a linear trilogy. They just use some of the same characters.
Awesome. That sounds great. And
it's an interesting series. Very hard science fiction.
Is he the one that wrote The Long Earth with Terry Pratchett?
I think so.
Have you ever read something or seen a movie or something with a character that you felt didn't have a sufficient backstory and maybe made up your own?
I will follow on to the Back to the Future thing here, because I've always wondered, how did Marty and Doc meet? I think somebody should do a prequel movie when Marty met Doc. And because it's a weird relationship that this 16-year-old boy has with the local crackpot inventor. They're clearly friends. They've clearly been doing things together for a while, at least long enough for Doc to build him this huge speaker in his workshop. And he trusts him enough to call him at 1 a.m. to bring a camera to a mall. So I just wonder, how did that relationship begin? And I came up with this idea that Marty was looking for some odd jobs. Maybe he went to the Burger King, which we know Doc lives behind, and he was looking for work and he saw a help wanted sign, or maybe there was a help wanted somewhere in the newspaper, like in the corner. And it was like, just really vague, wanted lab assistant. So he shows up, and the same thing that happened with Marty in Back to the Future 2, when he showed up at Doc's house and he put the big thing on his head and he's, I'm going to read your thoughts. Something like that happened. And he just became intrigued with all this technology. But then he's, hey, maybe I could get this guy to build me a really kick-ass guitar speaker thing. So he had his own selfish reasons, but from that, they bonded and became friends. And I just imagine there could be almost a whole series of these other little failed experiments that he helped him with, building up to the speaker and the time machine.
That's brilliant.
I think that would really be a kind of a cool story. Like 14-year-old Marty stumbling into Doc's, or even Doc comes out wearing a rocket pack on his back, and Marty's like, what is he doing? And then he like saves him or helps him. Like he almost goes into traffic and he like body checks him into the grass. And he's, oh, thank you, young man. And Marty's, what are you doing, guy? Gosh, you're going to hurt yourself. I don't know, anything like that. But just something, how did those two get together originally?
Yeah.
Because even people know about it. The professor knows. I notice you've still been hanging around with Dr. Emmett Brown, McFlies, and Nutcase. And it's like, how do you know? So clearly the town, they've been around town enough to be recognized by other people as being friends. And I just think that would be an interesting backstory. That we just know that they're friends. But people forget that he's 16 and Doc is in his 50s.
That's a really interesting dynamic there. And it never even occurred to me. You said that lots of people use your cards in different ways. Have any of these ways surprised you?
Yes. I often tell people, like, how do you play? I say, it's not a game. It is a system. It's a brainstorming spark, and that it's supposed to be used pre-game to establish a character's background. But I've had people say, oh yeah, I shuffled out 3 cards to each player during the game. And like at a crucial moment in the narrative, they could be like, oh, I'm going to invoke my favor with this noble who's at this party that we happen to be trying to sneak into, and he's going to help us get nice outfits or whatever like that. And I was like, that's brilliant. It's not meant to be used. It wasn't designed to be used. And it's not that it wasn't designed like that. It was just, it never occurred to me.
Yeah.
So I have since then inspired people, do whatever you want with it. I would love to hear different people's ways of playing it, whether random or deliberate. I've encouraged people to say, you don't even have to use the whole deck. You can literally go through and say, you know what, these 20 cards are the backstory elements that I want to see in my story. I've planned for each of them, or whatever they want. I've had somebody was like, oh, you should do one for randomly generating names. And I was like, oh God, that would be just so difficult. And a person, this was a tweet, and a person responded, oh, here's what you do. You start, well, you flip a card. That's the first letter. That's the second letter. They were literally going off of the first letter of the thing. Or even better, they were like, oh, so you pick a card, pick another card with a number, and that's how many syllables you go in to the text to find a syllable. And it was like, oh my God, that's brilliant. So I love that people are using their creativity to come up with more unique ways to use my creative tool. And it's fantastic.
I used them mid-book. A couple of weeks ago, I had a situation where someone had been stabbed with a magic sword and turned into like a chalky husk. And I was thinking, so, well, they've done that now. What am I going to do with them? And what, are they just going to leave him there or what? And I wasn't quite sure. I'd done it and I liked it, but I didn't know what to do with it. So I picked up the cards, and the one I picked up said hurricane up in the corner there.
Okay, sure.
And I'm like, oh wow, there's a hurricane coming. This guy who is now a chalky husk, he's because they're meant to be immortal, and he would come back eventually after 100 years or so. This hurricane's gonna blow him all over the desert or whatever, and there's no chance he'll ever get back together again. So that gave me somewhere to go with it. Like, now they've got a new problem coming, and now that gives them actions to try to deal.
And it gives him a reason to want to move him or get him somewhere safe. And now, oh gosh, we're carrying this big chalky thing. We need a wagon. And then, yeah, that's fantastic for creating conflict and crisis. I love it.
They just crunched him up and put him in a box.
It's an easy thing. Crunch, crunch. They got a little mortar and pestle. I'm working on a finger. What you got?
It's pretty much like that. It's a bit gross, my book. But yeah, that's how I've been using it for immediate inspiration when I'm not quite sure what's gonna happen next. I wondered if we could have a little game. A protagonist looks across the street and sees a guy walking down the street. What will these cards give us about the guy?
Okay, let's see. Protagonist is looking at a guy down the street. I got the occult card,
Oh,
which tells me this guy is wearing a dark robe. He's maybe walking with his arms like this, but there's a weird red glow coming from just inside the cowl. And this is already leaning towards a fantasy angle. So he sees him. So something's curious about him. Maybe the guy is even like looking around. He's looking suspicious. And then he goes up to a doorway, and I get the runaway card. And he makes like a motion on the door, and it opens and goes inside. So then our protagonist can follow, and he finds out that this is a cult that has been kidnapping not children, but mothers, like pregnant mothers, in an effort to bewitch their unborn babies to their cause. Maybe they're looking for the very specific host for some demon that they want to summon to this plane or something like that.
that's fantastic. Not only does it give a plot, you could write a book from that, or if not a series.
Absolutely. And it's just that easy. I've had game masters create entire one-shot campaigns just from a couple of cards, just that spark of inspiration. Because when I created characters before, and if I just left my own devices, they all ended up with having a very similar story to myself. Because yes, I want to embody myself into the characters, but at the same time, I want them to be unique. So that's why I love random charts and random cards and other things that can take me out of my quote unquote comfort zone or what I'm familiar with. And that's what these do. I like to say that these are my brain, the brainstorming power of my own brain in the palm of it. For instance, I play good characters. When I play Skyrim, I'm always helping the old lady or rescuing the chicken. And when it gives you that option, do you want to stab the old lady and take her money? I'm like, I can't do it. So these cards allow me to be more evil at random, to be a scoundrel or to be selfish or evil, so to speak.
That's fantastic. And I it makes a more satisfying experience for the player, the other players, and the reader, whatever medium you're working on.
Exactly. I mean, it's a good, well-rounded character, a good complex character is a bit random and unexpected. If you know exactly how they're going to act in this situation, then they're pretty simple. You want somebody who's complex and diverse, and you never know where the plot's going to go. One writer that I love, Scott Sigler, he did a series about writing, and he said, when you write your first book, don't worry about things making sense. If you paint yourself into a corner, aliens land, but it's a Western. That doesn't matter. Just, keep moving forward. Just write 50,000 words. It doesn't have to make sense. Then put it away and start on the real novel. But it was just like, don't let anything stop you. I think a lot of people, like here, you almost got yourself painted into a corner with this, oh, I don't know what to do with this person who's been transformed. Let the cards decide. Just as gamers love to let the dice decide. I love rolling a random die and just seeing how it turns out rather than being forced to follow the predicted path. And, oh, he's big and strong with a sword, he's going to win. No, he rolled a natural 1 and tripped on a rock, and the goblin stabbed him in the neck. Because that's life. Have you ever reached for a light switch and missed? Reach for a doorknob and you can fail at everyday tasks, and that's the randomness of life.
Do you write yourself?
I do. I'm not published or anything. I've been doing creative writing since middle school. My teacher in my gifted and talented class said you can either do math or you can write a story that we will then submit to a magazine at the end of the year. And I said, oh, I want to try that. And there's like a 1.5-page story I'd recently written in English class. And it was based on Tron and The Last Starfighter and a couple of my favorite movies of the time. A kid gets sucked into a video game at an arcade and has to fight for his life against this demon that is actually possessing the device. And I started writing it much longer form and like printing it out on a dot matrix printer and working on it every day. And eventually it got to be about 50 or 60 pages. And my teacher said, it's too long to submit. And that really got me going. I started coming up with this idea and that idea. And then I was reading other writing magazines and coming up with story ideas. So I've always written little side stories. I do a lot of collaborative storytelling with friends. I'll have a friend where we're both telling the story kind of in a round table kind of methodology. I like looking at images online, like of a female space pirate or something like that. And that's all it is, just a female space pirate. And I'm all like, okay, bam, she was kidnapped, and seeing where that can take the story. And I'll write a little flash fiction, little 1,000-word vignette, and then post it on the site and say, hey, you inspired me to write this little short story. And sometimes they're like, wow, that's really cool. And so I'm still writing other things just on my own, but nothing major. One day I'll write that novel, so to speak.
Are you planning to go to the 20 Books conference?
I am not. I have AwesomeCon coming up next month, December 20th through the 22nd. I'll have a table for better backstories there. I'm getting ready to order my table runner tablecloth and a stand-up poster, which will be really cool. Then I'll probably, hopefully, have a job as a teacher. That's going to be sucking up a lot of my time. And then I have Baltimore Comic-Con in October. I've also got a table reserved. So traveling outside of the Maryland, Northern Virginia, Delaware region for me right now is a bit of a stretch. I got to find my feet with my job and maybe moving into a new apartment and kind of see where things take me. I was working with Looney Games. I was asking for their help. They make card games like Flux. And I said, hey, can you help me? How do I get into stores? Because I kept calling stores and they weren't calling me back. And she goes, well, let me ask you a question. Do you want to make a lot of money? Do you want to be famous? Or do you just want to expand the power of creativity to the world? And I said, I want to expand the power of creativity to the world and be a little famous. She goes, so it's not about the money. I said, no, yeah, it's nice, but I'm not like so focused on the money. She said, don't bother with stores. It's not a game. And the store isn't going to invest any time in explaining that to people. She said, I'm better off just selling it at conventions, selling it online, and using my own general charisma to inspire and motivate people to try it out. And I was just at StellarCon yesterday with my girlfriend, and I saw an opportunity of some creative media folks. And I said, hey, would you like to have a little demonstration of my creation better backstories? And next thing I'm flipping cards. And my girlfriend shot a little video of it and I put it on Twitter. I sometimes put it out there on TikTok. I said, hey, if you'd like a backstory, just text me with what's my backstory. And I do little short 1-minute backstories where I flip over 5 cards and then I kind of help out a little bit. But in the end, where the character goes is entirely up to them. I love the idea that the same 5 cards can inspire 10 different people very differently. Just what one thing is going to inspire you? What nugget is that going to connect with your own life? And it'll go in a completely different direction.
That's awesome. Where can people find you?
You can find Better Backstories on our website, www.betterbackstories.com or .net, with or without a hyphen in between the words. I bought all 4. We're also on Instagram as @backstories22 and Twitter as @backstories22, on Facebook as Better Backstories. And follow us. We're often posting, I share memes and such. I've got a thing going on for my mascot. Her name is Ponder, and she is just a whimsical, creative thinking person. And I say her, but her gender is not relevant for her. And I have asked artists from all over the world to draw their own interpretation of Ponder. So we've got her as a goblin. We've got her as a robot. We've got her as a cyborg. We've got her as a superhero reading the newspaper. We've got her as a necromancer, like pondering how they're going to write this spell to corrupt the nation. And it's really great. So I call it the Ponder Parade, #Ponder Parade. And it's mostly on Twitter, but also on Instagram. And people are like, what does she normally look like? I said, there is no default Ponder. She is multidimensional and powered by the infinite skill of creativity. So there is no default Ponder. If anything, I'm the default Ponder. But it's just been a great little exercise. And have you ever seen those artistic displays where it's like the town mascot is a squid? So they make 20 big fiberglass squids and then give them to local artists, and the artists can then, one they cover in bedazzles, one they paint like a rainbow, one
Yeah.
they just do all black with a smiley face. That's what this was inspired by, the cow parade art style, art displays around the world.
Yeah. Oh, that's fantastic. I love that.
So I hopefully can inspire artists, and I can inspire writers who are just another type of artist, and I can inspire gamers, and I want to inspire everyone to be creative.
That's lovely. Thank you very much for speaking.
Thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate it.
Bye. Have a great day.